Some weapons are forgotten because they failed. Some are forgotten because they succeeded at the wrong moment, in the wrong war, pointed at the wrong target. And some are forgotten because what they represent is so far ahead of their time that the people who built them could not figure out what to do with them once they existed. Japan launched submarines during the Second World War that carried aircraft inside a watertight hangar built into the hull. The submarine would surface, the crew would assemble a folded float plane on deck, catapult it into the air, recover it after the mission, fold it back up, flood the hangar, and dive. The entire sequence, from surfacing to submerging again with the aircraft stowed, could be completed in under 30 minutes. The submarines that did this were the largest built by any nation during the entire war. They remain, by certain measures, among the most technically ambitious warships ever constructed. They were used twice in combat, both times against targets that had no military value. And then the war ended, and the Americans who captured them were so unsettled by what they found that they sank them in deep water before the Soviet Union could inspect them. That is the outline. The detail is considerably stranger. To understand why Japan built these things, you have to understand what Japan thought it was trying to accomplish in the Pacific in 1941, and what options were actually available to a navy that had spent 20 years being told it was not allowed to match its rivals in conventional surface strength. The Washington Naval Treaty and its successors had imposed hard limits on the number and size of capital warships Japan could build. What the treaties did not limit, at least not effectively, was submarines. And submarines, in the thinking of certain Japanese naval planners, offered a path around the numerical disadvantage that surface ship limits had locked in. The idea of a submarine carrying aircraft was not born in Japan. British naval engineers had experimented with it during the 1920s, fitting a small folding float plane to a converted submarine and demonstrating that the concept was at least physically possible, if not yet tactically coherent. The French had pursued similar experiments. What Japan did differently was pursue the concept with genuine institutional commitment over a period of years, with increasing seriousness and increasing scale, until what had begun as an experimental curiosity became a full industrial program producing the largest submarines ever built. The engineering problems involved were significant and not obvious until you start working through them. A conventional submarine's pressure hull is a carefully calculated structure. Adding a large watertight cylinder on top of it, running nearly the full length of the boat, capable of withstanding both the pressure of a deep dive and the mechanical stress of housing an aircraft and its fuel, changes almost every calculation that goes into the original design. The hangar had to be large enough to house a folded aircraft. It had to be sealed against seawater under pressure. It had to be ventilated to prevent fuel vapors accumulating to explosive concentration. It had to allow the aircraft to be assembled and ready to fly within a time frame that kept the submarine's surface exposure brief enough to be survivable. And the submarine carrying all of this had to remain maneuverable, diveable, and reasonably fast both on the surface and submerged. Japan's engineering north worked through these problems across a series of experimental designs through the 1930s and into the early war years, each iteration larger and more capable than the last. What they eventually produced, the I-400 class, was the culmination of everything learned along the way. The numbers are worth sitting with for a moment because they are genuinely extraordinary. The I-400 class submarines were 122 meters long. For comparison, a standard American fleet submarine of the same period was roughly 95 meters. The I-400 displaced 6,500 tons surfaced and over 6,700 tons submerged, making them nearly 3 times the displacement of a standard fleet boat. They carried enough fuel to circumnavigate the globe 1.5 times without refueling. Their hangar, built as a cylindrical tube 31 meters long and 3.5 meters in diameter mounted on the forward deck just aft of the conning tower, could hold 3 Aichi M6A Seiran float planes in folded configuration. The name Seiran translates roughly as mountain haze or storm from a clear sky, depending on the source, and it was a purpose-built aircraft designed from the outset specifically to be carried and launched from these submarines. It was not an adaptation of an existing design. It was engineered for this mission from a blank sheet. The Seiran was a two-seat float plane capable of carrying either a torpedo or an 800-kilogram bomb. Its wings folded back along the fuselage, its tail folded down. Its floats could be removed entirely for one-way missions where recovery was not planned, reducing drag and increasing speed. Fully assembled, it had a range of around 1,200 kilometers and a top speed of approximately 475 kilometers per hour, which made it faster than several land-based fighters it might have encountered. The aircraft and the submarine that carried it were designed as a single system, each one useless without the other, each one representing years of engineering work aimed at a single operational concept. That concept was strategic bombardment from unexpected directions. The I-400 class could approach a target from any ocean on Earth, surface well beyond the horizon, launch its aircraft, and be diving again before the planes reached the target. The defending nation would have no idea where the attack had originated. Radar and coastal defenses were oriented toward aircraft coming from land bases or carriers, not from submarines sitting on the ocean surface 200 kilometers offshore. If you are finding this as remarkable as it actually is, subscribe to the channel. There is more history buried in this war than most people realize, and this is one of the stranger corners of it. Back to the submarines. The question of what to do with this capability proved considerably harder to answer than the question of how to build it. Japan began planning the I-400 class in 1942 with an initial proposal for 18 boats. 18 submarines, each carrying 3 aircraft, would represent 54 strike aircraft that could appear from any direction with almost no warning. The proposals considered for this fleet ranged from the plausible to the extraordinary. Attacking the Panama Canal, which would force the American Navy to route warships around Cape Horn, adding weeks to any Pacific deployment. Attacking American cities on the West Coast to force a defensive reorientation of resources. Attacking the locks of the canal with aircraft carrying biological weapons, a plan that was seriously discussed at senior levels before being rejected, apparently on the grounds that it might provoke retaliation in kind, rather than on any broader moral reasoning. In the end, only 3 I-400 class boats were completed. The industrial capacity Japan needed to build 18 of them was being consumed by the war that was simultaneously destroying the industrial base required to fight it. The I-400 and I-401 were commissioned in late 1944. The I-402 was completed as a tanker conversion before she could be equipped with aircraft. Plans for additional boats were canceled as the strategic situation deteriorated beyond the point where long-range experimental weapon systems could be prioritized over conventional defense. With 2 operational boats and 6 Seiran aircraft between them, Japanese naval planners in 1945 were left trying to find a mission that matched the capability. The Panama Canal remained a theoretical target, but by mid-1945, attacking it would not meaningfully change the outcome of a war Japan was losing at every level. What the planners settled on instead was the American fleet anchorage at Ulithi Atoll in the Caroline Islands, one of the largest naval bases in the Pacific and the staging point for the planned American invasion of Japan. The plan was to approach Ulithi submerged, surface at night beyond radar range, assemble and launch the aircraft before dawn, and strike the anchored fleet at first light. The Seiran crews who were assigned this mission trained extensively. They knew the attack profile. Some of them had decided, apparently without being ordered to do so, to fly their aircraft into the targets without dropping their weapons and attempting recovery, turning the mission into a suicide attack in the manner of the kamikaze program that was consuming so much of Japan's remaining air strength by this point. Others intended to complete a conventional attack and attempt to return to the submarines for recovery. The question of which approach would actually be used was apparently still unresolved when the mission was canceled. It was canceled because Japan surrendered. On August 15, 1945, the Emperor's broadcast ended the war before the submarines reached their launch position. The I-400 and I-401, still at sea and still carrying their aircraft, received the surrender order and turned back toward Japan. What happened next is one of the more quietly unsettling episodes of the immediate post-war period. American naval personnel who boarded and inspected the I-400 class submarines were, by multiple accounts, genuinely startled by what they found. The technology was not crude, it was not a jury-rigged improvisation, it was sophisticated, carefully engineered, and in several respects more advanced than anything the Americans had developed in the same space. The submarines were taken to Pearl Harbor for detailed examination. Naval engineers went through them thoroughly. Then, in 1946, with Soviet naval observers beginning to express interest in inspecting the captured vessels, the United States Navy scuttled all 5 of the large Japanese submarines it had taken custody of, including the I-400 and I-401, in deep water off Hawaii. The official reasoning involved the terms of various post-war agreements and the logistical difficulty of maintaining foreign vessels in American ports. The timing, relative to Soviet requests for access, was noted by several observers at the time and has been noted by historians since. Whatever the complete reasoning, the submarines went to the bottom before any power other than the United States had a detailed look at them. The I-400 was located by researchers in 2013, resting on the ocean floor off Hawaii at a depth of around 820 meters. The I-401 was found separately. Both wrecks have been surveyed. The hangar structure is still recognizable on the hull. Here is the thing about the I-400 class that makes them genuinely difficult to place in any simple narrative about the Second World War. They were not a desperate last measure, not in the way that many late-war Japanese weapons programs were. They were conceived and designed in 1942, before Japan's strategic situation had become clearly hopeless, as an offensive weapon intended to project power against targets the conventional Navy could not reach. The engineering that went into them was serious, sustained, and successful in purely technical terms. The aircraft designed to fly from them was purpose-built and capable. The training of the crews was thorough.